You know, history is full of intolerant religious leaders, the Catholic priests who burned Protestant dissenters who murdered Catholic priests, witch hunters, book burners, intolerant scolds. It was even, we should remember, the Pharisees and the chief priests of Israel who moved among the crowd at the trial of Jesus, urging the people to call for his crucifixion. And guess what? They're at it again. Today, the Pharisees and scribes and chief priests work for the news media, and their religion is leftism. One of the central tenets of the leftist faith is that there's no objective moral truth, only narrative. So, if you can silence those who disagree with you, if you can force or bully them into saying that right is wrong, that male is female, that abortion is health, and freedom is slavery, those things will magically become true. Disagree, and we hear the age-old shout again, crucify him. And now they can broadcast crucify him on Twitter and CNN. They should have read their gospel. They would have learned you can kill the truth, but it never dies. Let me begin what I want to talk about, which is this assault on Christianity by the mainstream media in the person of the Covington kids and Mrs. Pence in her teaching. I want to start with a quote from C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. You will be amazed at this quote, at how apt it is. Obviously, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, one of the great Christian apologists, Mere Christianity, one of his central books, a book that was very important to me as I was deciding to become a Christian. Here's what he says. He says, suppose one reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper. Then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not be quite true or not quite so bad as it was made out. Is one's first feeling, thank God, even they aren't quite so bad as that? Or is it a feeling of disappointment and even a determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies are as bad as possible? If it is the second, then it is, I am afraid, the first step in a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. You see, one is beginning to wish that black was a little blacker. If we give that wish its head, later on we shall wish to see gray as black, and then to see white itself as black. Finally, we shall insist on seeing everything, God and our friends and ourselves included, as bad, and not be able to stop doing it. We shall be fixed forever in a universe of pure hatred. Who can deny that that is what is happening right as I'm speaking in the case of these Covington Catholic kids who were jeered by these black activists, kind of crazy. They're just, this is a nutcase movement, the black activists who were screaming at them, and then confronted in a very, very aggressive way by this Native American, Nathan Phillips, who apparently has been doing this a lot to people. But who can deny that the press now feels not only a feeling of disappointment that it turned out that their first story, that these kids, these white Catholic pro-life kids, were not the villains, but they not only feel a feeling of sheer disappointment, but a determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking their enemies are as bad as possible. That is exactly what C.S. Lewis described, exactly what they were doing. I've talked about this story before as a media event, and as the fact that it was an organic outgrowth of their bias, their hatred of Donald Trump, but not just Trump, of the people that he represents and the conservatism and republicanism. They remember it didn't start with Trump. That is nonsense. It was going on with Bush. It went on with Reagan way back in the 80s. So it's not about Donald Trump. It is about their particular religion, and it is a religion. New information is coming out that this guy, Nathan Phillips, he said I was a Vietnam Times veteran. He was in the Marine Reserves during the last couple of years of Vietnam. He never left America. He was a refrigerator repairman. He referred to himself as a recon ranger, but he was a refrigerator repairman. I am not dissing the guy's service, by the way. He did serve, and I think we have to give him credit to that, although he was busted to private. He had 3 AWOL charges. And the other thing about him is he has done this a lot. He is this guy. He burst into a church service and disrupted the church service. Years ago, in 2015, he went to the, I think it was Michigan University, Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, I think it is. And he did this again. He told the news media that he had confronted some students who had been dressed up in Indian garb. Here's a little clip of this, because it sounds just like the clip he had of the Covington kids.
Came upon this power of this party. You know, other individuals there. They waved me over, so I went over against the hello. They were painted up in the red face. Kind of try to laugh it off, but it's just funny,
Right.
So, short story is, I called him on racism. He threw a beer bottle at me, beer can at me.
He says they threw a beer bottle. Remember, he said the Covington kids wanted to tear him apart. The police showed up, and apparently there was no sign that there had even been a party there, so we don't even know if he's telling the truth. This is what this guy does. And as I said before, I can't get this out of my mind, this line he had about these here indigenous lands. We can't build a wall here while he's standing in Washington, D.C., the capital of the greatest industrialized nation on earth, as if we were still, riding around on palominos in the prairie hunting buffalo. I mean, it's just absurd, and only a leftist media would have bought into this. I just want to play what the Covington chaperone, a lady named Jill Hamlin, told Fox and Friends actually happened. And the reason is she, of all the people who's been describing this, has what sounded to me like the truth. It just had the ring of truth to it. Here's that interview.
Jill, you say that your boys, the boys there, were targeted. Was it because they were wearing MAGA caps?
I think that was one of the reasons they were targeted, and I think they were also targeted for what they stood for.
Which is?
Which is Christianity, the right for life, and they were singled out, and I believe partially because of the color of their skin they were targeted.
Jill, why was Nick Sandmann, why did Nathan Phillips, the Native American, why did he choose him? Why did he get in his face? What happened before that?
We were all just gathered on the steps. We had obviously heard the horrific insults that were thrown at our children by the Black Hebrew Israelites, and the boys were gathered on the steps, and I don't know why Nathan Phillips chose Nick Sandmann. I think he would have targeted anyone, but maybe it was because Nick Sandmann had the courage to look this man in the face.
This is really true what she is saying, that they were targeted, but they were not just targeted by these people for their hats and for their beliefs. The media too, which is still saying these MAGA hats, they shouldn't have been wearing those. What were they doing wearing those MAGA hats? The answer to which is not something I can say on the air. It's just 2 words, but it's very simple. They can wear any damn hat they please. But for our mainstream media, the chief priests of the leftist religion, just standing there with a MAGA hat is an act of heresy deserving of punishment. It's an enticement to riot because of their religion. It's just like somebody, did something absurd, like put out a so-called work of art by putting a crucifix in a vat of urine. That would be essentially what they do by wearing a MAGA hat. I do want to say that our friends at Newsbusters compiled a list of how each media outlet covered this story, the Covington story. And there were good people. CBS and ABC did well. They held off. They did not come out and attack these kids until the new information was coming in, and immediately spotted the fact that this story was going haywire, that it was not what it was supposed to be. But NBC, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they were all trash. They all covered themselves in shame, which is hard because it's the other layers of shame were already there. So they were just recoding themselves with more shame. I have to mention National Review and other right-wing outlets that jumped on this story too. And I love National Review. I like a lot of the people there. I know a lot of them are bright. But they jumped on this thing. They ran a story that said these Covington kids might just as well have spit on the cross. They took it down. They apologized. But I want to tell you that I feel that these right-wingers who jump on these stories are like battered children. They are in such a race to prove to the media that they're not racist. They're the good Republicans. They're the good conservatives. And they ought to just stop. The media is abusive. It is abusing you. And they're acting like people who have been abused. They're acting like children who have been abused. When you're abused by your parents, you keep your head down. You don't want to say anything. You walk on eggshells because anything might set them off. off because they're unreliable, they're undependable, and they might go off at any time. That's the way the right wing acts. They did it to Steve King, too. And again, I'm not defending Steve King because he said things in the past that I find suspect. But I did tell you, and I say it right now, I have no idea what Steve King said to the New York Times because the New York Times lies. They lie, and so I'm not going to just prove my bona fide by coming out and saying, oh, Steve King should resign the minute the New York Times runs a story that makes him look like a racist. They make all of us look like racists. It is what they do, and the National Review should really do a full soul check on this and ask themselves how their hatred of Donald Trump, their fear of the media, has made them jump on this bandwagon too soon. It is time for them to take stock because that was a big, big mistake. And it's not just any mistake. It's a mistake that grows out of the state of their mind, which is created by the abuse of the media. So this is what's happening now at Covington, okay? Here are some of the kids at Covington telling you what's going on. They've had to close the school, and they will tell you what's happening.
Several media platforms blatantly lied about the events regarding the controversy in D.C., and it has affected us as a community and individuals greatly. There have been many threats against our lives, against our parents. Some of these threats include that we should all be locked in the school and it should be burnt to the ground, the school being bombed, school shooting threats. It's really scary. I know that a lot of people are scared to go to school tomorrow and won't be attending because of what could happen. There have been cops there ever since the incident, and I think there will be a lot more tomorrow. A lot of the negativity and the hate surrounding this event comes from people on social media doxing people that were at the event. I myself wasn't even present, but I'm very vocal about defending my school and my peers, and I have been doxed on 3 separate occasions. This has led to a tsunami of hateful messages and threats and everything above.
So these are kids being doxxed. These are 15, 16-year-old kids being doxxed. Their information put out online, and death threats. I mean, this is what the media has wrought. And I just want to show you the media's attitude. Not all of them, again, ABC and CBS handled this well, but I want to show you this. NBC was one of the chief offenders. Savannah Guthrie on NBC has Nick Sandmann, who was the boy who was kind of targeted by this guy, and who was called, people were saying, he should be punched in the face. One woman tweeted that she would give oral sex to anybody who would punch him. And this is Savannah Guthrie on NBC, one of the chief offenders. This is how she interviews him.
Do you feel that you owe anybody an apology? Do you see your own fault in any way?
As far as standing there, I had every right to do so. My position is that I was not disrespectful to Mr. Phillips. I respect him. I'd like to talk to him. I mean, in hindsight, I wish we could have walked away and avoided the whole thing.
As far as I'm concerned, Savannah Guthrie should be groveling on the floor, begging this kid for forgiveness, not asking if he wants to apologize. She should be sorry she works for a network that slandered children. She should be sorry that they haven't stood down from that slander. She should be sorry for everything they did. And she, as a representative of that network, not personally, but as a representative of that network, ought to be groveling and asking for forgiveness instead of asking him, the kid, whether he wants to apologize. There was just a wonderfully revelatory moment, although not completely revelatory, on The View with Whoopi and Joy. As I always say, without Whoopi, there's no joy. Without joy, there's no Whoopi. And here's Whoopi and Joy talking about how this could have happened.
Many people admitted they made snap judgments before these other facts came in. But is it that we just instantly say that's what it is based on what we see in that moment and then have to walk stuff back when it turns out we're wrong? Why is that? Do we keep making the same mistake?
Because we're desperate to get Trump out of office. That's why.
So she at least was honest about that. But again, this happened with Reagan in the 80s. It happened to George W. Bush. It happens to every Republican. It happened to Mitt Romney during the races when they accused him of murder, essentially, or allowed him to be accused of murder. This is what they do. They are, and it's more than this. In fact, Donald Trump Jr. I think, came closer to the truth in his accusation on Fox. Here's what he said to Laura Ingraham.
You had some Catholic schoolboys that were at a Right to Life march, okay? They were wearing a MAGA hat. They had to pounce because the media wants that to be true. They want a bunch of nice Catholic kids, happen to be white. They want them to be the enemy. This is what they've created. The media has done this to themselves. They have shot themselves in the foot time and time again because they so desperately want this to be the truth.
He's absolutely right about this. It is, in fact, what these kids represent. Chief among it, the Christian religion, their Catholicism, which was being on full display in their defending the right to life, the right for babies to live and grow in the womb without being destroyed, without having themselves wiped off the face of the earth. We know this because of the way they treated Karen Pence when it came out that she was teaching part-time at a small private Christian school that, among other things, upheld the classic traditional Christian teaching against homosexuality. This was, I mean, the things that people were saying about this. William McGurn wrote a great column about it yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, quoting Politico, saying, how could this happen in America, that Christians would continue to be Christians and have this traditional belief? On CNN, I mean, I got to play this. Is an amazing piece of sound. John King suggested that Karen Pence should not be allowed to have Secret Service protection because it's paid for by all people, and she's insulting gays. Here's this clip.
When you use your core beliefs in this kind of public way, obviously it does open yourself up to criticism. And I think the Pences might be a little naive to think that that wouldn't happen if she is going to make this decision. It's interesting to me that they made no attempt to get ahead of it. Right. They made this announcement that she was going to be working at this school and then saw the backlash come a couple days later.
Does it matter that all taxpayers pay for her housing? All taxpayers pay for her Secret Service protection. It's not her fault that she needs protection. This is the world we live in. But all taxpayers subsidize her life. Does it matter?
So you mean, does her First Amendment freedoms get somehow curtailed because taxpayers pay for her accommodations and her security? I don't know that a lot of people would sign on to that.
That's Olivier Knox bringing King back to reality. But I love the woman, too, saying, how could they not get out in front of this and realize what a problem this was to be supporting traditional Christian teaching? How can CNN be so locked in its own world that they don't understand that this is not a problem for a lot of people? Let's talk about for a minute what Christians believe about homosexuality. The traditional belief is that things are made for a reason. God gave us a purpose. We have a purpose in our lives. We have a purpose in what we do, that our actions have moral ramifications, that we can tell this is true because we understand when we hear parables about reality, we know that there are actual moral stories because reality has a moral level to it. Sex was made for the creation of children. Children require care and feeding. They require a mom and a dad, and therefore only a mom and a dad in a state of marriage should have sex. That is what Christians believe. The Catholics believe that you shouldn't even use birth control because that's getting in the way of the purpose of sex. But most Christians believe that sex should be had in the context of marriage so the children can be taken care of. And that's why they don't accept homosexuality. Homosexuality is not having sex for that purpose. It is anytime you're not having sex with that purpose in mind, many Christians believe you are simply using your partner for your personal pleasure. As you know, I have a different point of view on this, but it accepts many of the premises. It accepts the premises that things have a purpose, that there is a moral level to life. I accept all those premises. That's the premise that they have a problem with. William McGurn, in that column I mentioned, he quotes Samuel Alito, the Supreme Court Justice, his dissent on Obergefell, one of these terrible decisions that said basically states cannot pass laws against gay marriage. It may not forbid gay marriage. Alito, in his dissent, said, I assume that those who cling to old beliefs will be able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes, but if they repeat those views in public, they will risk being labeled as bigots and treated as such by governments, employers, and schools. And who can say that Alito was wrong? He was obviously exactly right. The left thinks they can change moral truth by forcing you to say what they want you to say and silencing you if you will not say it. But the truth doesn't die. Crucify the truth. They tried it once. He came right on back. And that makes you crazy. It makes these people who want the truth to be what they say it is. It makes them crazy. It makes them full of hate. And remember what C.S. Lewis said, when you find that you are beginning to wish that black was a little blacker, you will ultimately wish to see gray as black, and then you will see white itself as black. And if you think that is not true, just take a look at what happened on Tuesday, that's yesterday, in New York State. Governor Andrew Cuomo announced that the New York State legislature had passed the Reproductive Health Act, which allows mothers to abort their babies up until birth. He had many buildings, including the One World Trade Center, lit pink to celebrate this decision, which, by any stretch of the imagination, is infanticide. They have just legalized infanticide. I mean, the moment before birth, how can that child not be a child? How can that be? By what logic? By what moral logic? Only the moral logic that silences people, that hates them for going to the Right to Life march, that ignores the issue of the right to life in favor of nonsense controversies, does everything it can, including the Covington story, including the Ben Shapiro baby Hitler story, everything it can to distract you from the issue at hand, which is that these people are ultimately moving toward infanticide because they have taught themselves that black is white, and they think if they can make you say it and silence people who deny it, they think ultimately black will become white. Ain't gonna happen. The truth remains true.